faithfully delivering value, we explore great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally Talking Books. I'm the Chinese translator for this book. I'm the translator, John Zan. This is part two of the new history of the Silk Road, covering what we started last time. I covered the recent discoveries about the Silk Road and its development, highlighting key cities along the route. Places like Loulan, Kucha, Gaocheng, and Samarkand in Central Asia each had its own unique features in politics, economy, culture, and religion. Next, I'll shift focus from Central Asia back to the Silk Road's origin point. Chang'an, now known as Xi'an, was the capital during the Northern Zhou, Sui, and Tang dynasties. During this time, especially in the Tang era, Chang'an was a diverse, cosmopolitan city where Han Chinese and Hu people coexisted, blending different cultures. As a global city, Chang'an naturally had many foreigners living there. Back then, many Central Asian women served in Chang'an's taverns and were favorites of patrons like the poet Li Bai. Li Bai wrote a poem titled Youthful Travels with the line, "After treading through all the fallen flowers, where to wander? Smiling, I enter the Huji's tavern." In the tavern. Of course, the Hu residents in Chang'an weren't just tavern servers. Many held high positions and wielded significant influence. In summer 2000, Sogdian tombs from the Northern Zhou era were discovered near Xi'an, filled with exquisite burial artifacts. One tomb's owner was Anjia, whose ancestors came from Bukhara, similar to the historical figure An Lushan. The Chinese referred to Bukhara as Anglo. Sogdians in China often adopted place names as surnames, thus those from Bukhara took N as their surname. Anjia's tomb contains an epitaph, a square stone slab inscribed with his life details. The epitaph states Anjia was from Liangzhou, now Gansu province. Wu Wei was Hexi region's largest city and a key hub for Sogdians in China. Anjia was influential. He held the position of Sabao in Tongchao. Tongzhou is now Dali County, Shanji. Sabo started as caravan leader, but evolved into an official title for Sogdian leaders under Chinese dynasties since Northern Wei. But Sogdians, like Anjia, who settled in China, were also shaped by Chinese cultural influences. Take Anjia's tomb as an example to illustrate this. Anjia's tomb features a sloped passageway and burial chamber, along with a squared Chinese epitaph, clearly elements of Han Chinese culture. The stone couch with surrounding screens in the burial chamber reflects Hu traditions. This stone couch has screens on three sides, carved with scenes from the deceased's life, banquets, hunts, gatherings, and dance performances. When discussing Sogdian dance, we must mention the whirling dance. Tang poet Bai Jui wrote The Whirling Girl, opening with, "The whirling girl, her heart follows strings, hands follow drums. At their sound, sleeves rise like swirling snow, spinning left-right tirelessly, endless rotations without pause." To Bai Jui, the whirling dance resembled a spinning wheel. This dance likely involved continuous somersaults like Peking opera martial artists, not simple spinning, so skilled that when the portly An Lushan performed it, banquet guests gasped in amazement. During Tang times, more Hu people entered Chang'an from the west, not just merchants, but refugees like the last prince of Iran's Sassanid Empire. After Arabs conquered his homeland, he fled to Chang'an. The Tang helped them establish a small state in western Afghanistan under nominal protection, but they couldn't withstand Arab military might. The prince fled back to Chang'an, where he eventually died. These Eastern Hu brought Zoroastrianism and Christianity to Chang'an. Chang'an had at least 5 Zoroastrian temples, but the more famous import was Christianity. In Xi'an's Forest of Stelis Museum stands a massive monument, the Nestorian Stele. Daqing means Rome, while Nestorianism refers to Christianity originating in Syria. The stele's inscription begins with a concise summary of Christian doctrine. It states, "Through the void's will, heaven and earth formed. Sun and moon moved, creating day and night. creating all beings, empowering humans to govern seas. This echoes Genesis, God creating heaven, earth, all creatures, and appointing humans to steward fish, birds, and land animals. Later, it describes the Virgin Mary's miraculous birth of Jesus and Magi following a star to present gifts to the newborn, as told in the New Testament. The inscription then recounts the history of Nestorian Christianity's spread during the Tang Dynasty. It spans over a century, from Taizong's reign, when Persian missionary Alapin came to preach, to Dezon's era, when this stele was erected. The inscription includes Syriac passages listing over 60 Nestorian names in both Chinese and Syriac. Such pervasive foreign influences. Naturally, the aesthetic sensibilities of Chang'an's Han Chinese residents absorbed these foreign flavors. In 1970, archaeologists discovered 2 pottery jars and a silver jar in Heijia village, southern Xi'an. These contained over 1,000 items, exquisite gold and silverware, gemstones, medicinal herbs, and 478 coins. This is the renowned Heijia village treasure hoard. The gold and silver items are exceptionally fine, many in Hu-style designs. Nomadic peoples who spent lifetimes on horseback typically used leather pouches for convenient drinking. Among the finds is a masterpiece, a drinking flask shaped like such a leather pouch. The flask features a galloping horse motif. Another treasure is the famous agate cup with gold inlaid beast head, China's only such artifact, nationally forbidden from export. Called raitin in Greek, it resembles a funnel for drinking. Wine flows from its base when tipped. Common in Persia and Greece, not native to central China. Scholars speculate the owner was a Han noble or official, showing how foreign styles fascinated Chang'an. The Heizhou village treasure is now a permanent exhibit at Shanxi History Museum, worth visiting if interested. Why were these treasures buried? Scholars believe they were hastily hidden as An Lushan's rebels advanced on Chang'an. Perhaps the owner perished in the chaos, leaving this legacy to us over a millennium later. By 763 CE, after 8 brutal years, the rebellion was quelled at terrible cost. Tang lost all territory west of Lanzhou, while warlords dominated regions like Hebei and Shandong beyond central control or taxation. Meanwhile, both An Lushan's rebels and the Uyghur troops Tang enlisted against them plundered central China. Han nationalism surged, Chang'an grew hostile to Silk Road travelers, Hu people symbolized disaster, many long-term Hu residents changed surnames to hide their identities. By the late 9th century, in 8081, the Han Chao rebels captured Chang'an, looting extensively and reducing the Hai Tang's prosperity to ashes. Tang poet Wei Huang wrote the epic Lament of the Lady of Qin, portraying the horrors through a refugee woman's voice. Its raw depiction of chaos made the poem instantly popular after publication. Many households inscribed it on screens and curtains, earning Wei Zhuan the nickname Qin Fu Yin Scholar, placing him alongside greats like Du Fu and Bai Zhui. But its blunt accusations against warlords' wartime atrocities led to suppression. Excluded from his official collection, it was eventually lost. Fortunately, manuscripts survived in Dunlong's library cave. Historian Chen Yanke later published it, resurrecting this longest Tang poem. Let's see how the poet described post-rebellion Chang'an. The poem reads, "Silent, silent, what remains of Chang'an now? Ruined markets, desolate streets where wheat sprouts grow, Tartar steeds gallop through palace halls, thorns choke the floral calyx tower, all former glory buried, looking around, only desolation, nothing familiar. The imperial palace was torched, warehouse silks reduced to ashes, Chang'an streets filled with nobles' corpses, palaces lay in ruins, people scattered. The once million-strong capital vanished in warfare, ceasing to exist. During the 5 dynasties, China's capital moved east to Bianlian. The political center left Guangzhou, silencing the northwestern Silk Road. If Chang'an's fall was a tragic Silk Road finale, another city, Dunhuang, preserved its memory while declining. Home to the library, cave, treasure. Dunhuang sits at the Hexi Corridor's western end. Westward lies vast deserts before reaching modern Hami and Xinjiang. Geographically isolated, it marked Han China's western frontier. Monk Xuanzang once sneaked across here, following desert skeletons as guides to barely reach Hami Oasis. The Dunhuang Library Cave discovery story is familiar, involving two explorers contemporary with Sven Hedden, who revolutionized Silk Road understanding. One was British archaeologist Auriel Stein, who made multiple expeditions to the western regions and became the first to purchase large quantities of manuscripts from Dunhuang's library cave. The other explorer was French sinologist Paul Pelliot. Though arriving after Stein and only once, he selected the most valuable manuscripts, focusing on secular and non-Chinese texts, establishing Dunhuangology's research direction. It's fair to say that concentrated revelations about the Silk Road began with the discovery of the Dunhuang Library Cave documents. Now I'll focus on the lesser-known stories of the library cave. These stories sketch a portrait of Dunhuang during the Silk Road's decline. By the late 19th century, Dunhuang's Mogao caves had been abandoned for nearly a millennium, with many grottos filled with sand. A wandering Taoist priest named Wang arrived in Dunhuang, collecting alms to clean and restore the caves. In summer 1900, Wang's assistant tapped a wall with his pipe and heard echoes, revealing the library cave. This tiny cave, under 3 meters in all dimensions, was originally carved to honor Hong Bian, a 9th century monastic leader whose portrait adorned the walls. It became a manuscript repository in the early 10th century. A sutra preface in the cave records a monk's dismay at incomplete scriptures in his temple. He vowed to collect ancient texts, repair them, and ensure their transmission. After his death, others continued this work until the cave was sealed. Paper being expensive in Dunhuang, monks economized. Some scriptures were copied on obsolete government documents. Students practiced calligraphy on blank margins and verso sides, sometimes copying contracts and stories. Thus, the cave preserved non-Buddhist texts in numerous languages, beyond Chinese and Tibetan, including Sanskrit, Sogdian, Uyghur, Khotanese, even a small Hebrew document likely carried by a merchant as an amulet. Dunhuang documents show that before the An-Lushan rebellion, the region maintained close ties with central China. Nearly all Buddhist texts came from inland. Massive investments from the Tang court sustained local economies in Dunhuang and the western regions. However, all this collapsed after the An-Lushan rebellion. The Tang dynasty recalled troops from the western regions to defend the capital, and basically they were wiped out in the Battle of Tampass. At this point, the Tibetans seized the opportunity, first occupying the eastern end of the Hexi corridor and cutting off the route from the interior to the western regions. Then they gradually encroached westward along the Hexi corridor, step by step. By the year 786 AD, the Tibetans finally captured Dunhuang, marking the start of the Tibetan era for Dunhuang. After this, currency gradually disappeared, and people started trading with grain or cloth instead. Meanwhile, Tibetan language and script became widespread. Clearly, Tibetan became the official language. Many scribes in Dunhuang learned it, using Tibetan to draft documents for officials and contracts for commoners. Some adopted Tibetan names, and some even transcribed local Chinese songs using Tibetan script. Tikwazichi was a type of folk song at that time. One example is, "Spring breeze, light rain moistens my clothes. When will this trance end?" 1. Looking back at Yangzhou east and west. 2. The lake water rebuilds the Yangtze River, flowing for thousands of miles. But this writer misspelled Yangzhou as Yangzhou, probably because he'd been under Tibetan rule for so long. This Dunhuang resident likely had no idea what Yangzhou even was anymore. In 842 AD, Langdharma Tsempo, Langdharma being the name, Tempo the title, Tibet's last leader was assassinated for opposing Buddhism, causing the entire Tibetan Empire to collapse. 6 years later, Zhang Yuchao, a Han Chinese in Dunhuang, raised an army, drove out the Tibetans, and sent envoys to Chang'an to present maps to the Tang dynasty. The Tang emperor held a grand ceremony to celebrate the land's recovery, and Zhang Yuchao was granted the title of Gui Jun, the title of military governor. Gui generally refers to a title bestowed by Central Plains dynasties on minority regimes that voluntarily submitted tribute. Later historical texts listed the Gui Jun in the foreign states section, showing that Dunhuang had some independence back then. This independent Han Chinese regime lasted until the early Northern Song dynasty. The library cave was sealed, and shortly after it was conquered by the Western Shah. Since the library cave was sealed just before the Gui Jun's fall, the timing was close, so it contains the most documents from that era. People also know the most details about this period. Overall, the Silk Road at this time couldn't hold a candle to the early Tang dynasty. In the late 9th and early 10th centuries, major empires in Eastern Eurasia, like the Tang, Tibet, Uyghurs, and the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate, collapsed one after another, fragmenting the region's political map. Dunhuang was surrounded by various political forces. To its east were the Ganzhou Uyghurs occupying Jiangye, while inland China saw ever-changing regimes during the Five Dynasties period. West of Dunhuang lay the Zijou Uyghurs, controlling modern Iroquois and Turpan, with the Khotan Kingdom and Samanid Empire further west. Smaller factions like Tibetan remnants and nascent Western Shah forces were too numerous to count, all actively exchanging envoys and gifts as key Silk Road travelers. The 964 AD wine ledger from the library cave records provisions supplied by Dunhuang to visiting envoys. This account documents 51 envoys from 6 different regimes hosted within 7 months. Most guests stayed only days, but one particularly persistent group lingered for 203 days. Dunhuang had to provide daily sustenance from its limited resources, a significant burden. Besides envoys, monks were another group traversing the Silk Road. Chinese pilgrims to India and foreign monks visiting Mount Wutai to worship Manjusri Bodhisattva. Just like modern travelers use Lonely Planet guides, ancient monks had similar travel aids on the Silk Road. The library cave contained Chinese and Khotanese geographical texts describing routes from China to India, plus Khotanese phrase books. These phrase books featured Khotanese-Chinese translations with pronunciation guides. Simple everyday phrases like, bring water for cooking, likely used when purchasing supplies. Other Sanskrit Khotanese phrase books revealed their users' identities through content. Sample phrases, I'm going to China, what brings you to China? To see Manjusri Bodhisattva. Clearly, Sanskrit served as a lingua franca for monastic communication along pilgrimage routes. Beyond government accounts and monastic guides, the cave also contained trade documents. Long-distance commerce was often an envoy's side business. Envoys presenting tribute to Chinese emperors received lavish rewards, so lucrative that some borrowed money to rent camels just to join missions. The library cave contains records of monastery finances, including many foreign goods like Khotan felt, cosmetic powders, and gemstones from Afghanistan, India, and elsewhere. These precious items likely arrived in Dunhuang with envoys. Beyond this long-distance trade by envoys, there was also Dunhuang's local business system and short-distance trade. For instance, locals in Dunhuang formed mutual aid groups called Shei. Members paid fees for monthly gatherings and could borrow from the fund for weddings or funerals, or even crowdfund to carve grottos. Another example is a letter from the late Tang period in the library cave, where a Sogdian merchant reports to his boss on collecting cloth door to door in Changlei County, far northeast of Dunhuan. At that time, Dunhuan faced currency shortages, forcing barter. For example, 4 pieces of dyed cloth could be traded for 1 sheep. 1,000 years later, when Orel Stein arrived in Dunhuan, the situation was similar. Caravans in this region still focused on short-distance trade, mainly selling local goods. In this withering commercial atmosphere, the glorious Silk Road had essentially come to an end. After the library cave was sealed in 1082 AD, it lay buried in sand, yet the reason for its closure remains unknown to this day. But what follows may provide some answers to why the library cave was sealed and how the memory of the Silk Road faded. This is the final stop on our Silk Road journey. Khotan. Historically, Khotan had close ties with Central Plains dynasties and was seen as culturally similar to inland China. But this memory, born from the Silk Road and extinguished with it, eventually vanished. Khotan is today's Hetian in Xinjiang, located southwest of the Tarim Basin, renowned since ancient times for its jade production. It's said that jade unearthed from wealthy tombs in the Yin ruins of Anyang from the Shang dynasty came from Hetian. Today, the Hetian oasis has the highest concentration of Uyghur people in Xinjiang, with small proportions of other ethnic groups. However, before 1000 AD, residents here did not speak Uyghur, but a language from the Iranian family called Khotanese. Khotan, situated between Chinese and Indian civilizations, was deeply influenced by India. In the late 2nd century BC, after Buddhism was introduced, it gradually became a center of Mahayana Buddhism and a key stop in Buddhism's spread to China. In 260 AD, Zhu Shixing, China's earliest monk to journey west for Buddhist scriptures, traveled from Luoyang to Khotan seeking Sanskrit texts. His monastic name was Baji, later inspiring the character Marshal Tianping in Journey to the West. Later, Faxian of the Eastern Jin and Songyun of the Northern Wei both passed through Khotan en route to India, documenting its flourishing Buddhism and numerous temples. Of course, the most famous monk to visit Khotan was Xuanzang, who recorded local legends during his return journey from India. For instance, Khotan's kings were said to descend from both Vaishravana and Chinese emperors. This Vaishravana, also called Yuan Tianwang, is Buddhism's northern guardian deity. In 842 AD, Langdharma Tenpo, Langdharma being the name, Tempo the title, Tibet's last leader, was assassinated for opposing Buddhism, causing the Tibetan Empire to collapse. 6 years later, Zhang Yichao, a Han Chinese in Dunhuang, raised an army, expelled the Tibetans, and sent envoys to Chang'an, presenting maps to the Tang court. The Tang emperor held a grand ceremony celebrating the recovered territory, granting Zhang Yichao the title of Gui Yi Jun, military governor. He typically denotes a title bestowed by Central Plains dynasties upon minority regimes that voluntarily submitted tribute. Later historical records categorized Yi Jun under foreign states, indicating Dunhuan's relative independence. This independent Han regime lasted until the early Northern Song dynasty. After the library cave was sealed, it was eventually conquered by Western Xia. Since the cave was sealed shortly before Yi Jun's fall, it contains the most documents from that era. We consequently know the most details about this period. Overall, the Silk Road during this time paled in comparison to its early Tang heyday. In the late 9th and early 10th centuries, major Eastern Eurasian empires, Tang China, Tibet, Uyghur Khaganate, and the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate, collapsed, fragmenting the political landscape. Dunhuan became surrounded by various powers: Ganzhou Uyghurs to the east in Zhangye, and the rapidly changing Five Dynasties regimes further inland. To Dunhuang's west lay Zizhu Uyghurs, controlling Urarqi and Turpan, with Khotan Kingdom and Samanid Empire beyond. Countless smaller factions, Tibetan remnants, nascent Western Shah, actively exchanged envoys and gifts, becoming key Silk Road travelers. A wine ledger from 964 AD in the library cave records how much wine and grain Dunhuang supplied to various envoys. This account shows 51 envoys from 6 different regimes were hosted within 7 months. Most guests stayed only days, but one particularly persistent group lingered for 203 days. Dunhuang had to provide daily sustenance from its limited resources. Quite a burden. Besides envoys, monks were another group traversing the Silk Road. Chinese pilgrims to India, and foreign monks visiting Mount Wutai to worship Manjusri Bodhisattva. Just like modern travelers use Lonely Planet guides, ancient monks had similar travel aids on the Silk Road. The library cave contained Chinese and Khotanese geographical texts describing routes from China to India, plus Khotanese documents. These phrase books featured Khotanese-Chinese translations with pronunciation guides, simple daily phrases like "bring water for cooking," likely used when purchasing supplies. Other Sanskrit Khotanese phrase books reveal their users' identities through content. I'm going to China. What brings you to China? To see Manjusri Bodhisattva? Clearly, Sanskrit served as a lingua franca for monastic communication along pilgrimage routes. Beyond government accounts and monastic guides, the cave also contained trade documents. Long-distance commerce was often an envoy's side business. Envoys presenting tribute to Chinese emperors received lavish rewards, so lucrative that some borrowed money to rent camels just to join missions. Monastery inventories in the cave listed foreign goods like Khotan felt, cosmetic powders, and gemstones from Afghanistan and India. These precious items likely arrived with diplomatic envoys. Alongside long-distance envoy trade existed Dunhuang's local business networks and short-haul commerce. For example, locals formed mutual aid groups called Shay Yi. Members paid fees for monthly gatherings, borrowed for weddings and funerals, and even crowdfunded grotto construction. Also, there's a letter from the late Tang period in the library cave where a Sogdian merchant reports to his boss about collecting cloth door to door in Chonglei County, far northeast of Dunhuang. At that time, Dunhuang faced currency shortages and poor circulation, forcing barter. For example, 4 pieces of dyed cloth could be traded for 1 sheep. 1,000 years later, when Oral Stein arrived in Dunhuang, the situation was similar. Caravans in this region still focused on short-distance trade, mainly selling local goods. In this withering commercial atmosphere, the glorious Silk Road had essentially come to an end. After the library cave was sealed in 1002 AD, it lay buried in sand, yet the reason for its closure remains unknown to this day. But what follows may provide some answers to why the library cave was sealed and how the memory of the Silk Road faded. This is the final stop on our Silk Road journey. And Khotan. Historically, Khotan had close ties with Central Plains dynasties and was seen as culturally similar to inland China. But this memory, born from the Silk Road and extinguished with it, eventually vanished. Khotan is today's Hetian in Xinjiang, located southwest of the Tarim Basin, renowned since ancient times for its jade production. It's said that jade unearthed from wealthy tombs in the ruins of Anyang from the Shang dynasty came from Hetian. Today, the Hetian oasis has the highest concentration of Uyghur people in Xinjiang, with small proportions of other ethnic groups. However, before 1000 AD, residents here did not speak Uyghur, but a language from the Iranian family called Khotanese. Khotan, situated between Chinese and Indian civilizations, was deeply influenced by India. In the late 2nd century BC, after Buddhism was introduced, it gradually became a center of Mahayana Buddhism and a key stop in Buddhism's spread to China. In 260 AD, Zhu Xixing China's earliest monk to journey west for Buddhist scriptures, traveled from Luoyang to Khotan seeking Sanskrit texts. His monastic name was Baji, later inspiring the character Marshal Tianpeng in Journey to the West. Later, Faxian of the Eastern Jin and Songyang of the Northern Wei both passed through Khotan en route to India, documenting its flourishing Buddhism and numerous temples. Of course, the most famous monk to visit Khotan was Xuanzang, who recorded local legends during his return journey from India. For instance, Khotan's kings were said to descend from both Vaishravana and Chinese emperors. This Vaishravana is also called Duan Tianwang, the guardian deity of the north in Buddhism. The legend of Khotan king's lineage perfectly fits Khotan's hybrid Chinese-Indian cultural environment. Traditionally, Xuanzang recorded the legend of silk's introduction to Khotan. The Khotan king wanted to establish sericulture but couldn't break the Eastern technology blockade. He married a princess from the East who, hearing Khotan lacked silk, secretly smuggled silkworm eggs in her dead dress, bringing silk production to Khotan. To this day, Khotan remains a major silk producer. At the Dondon Ulikwe site, archaeologists found a wooden panel depicting this story, showing the princess with someone pointing at her headdress, revealing its hidden contents. This matches Xuanzang's account perfectly. Khotan was remote and resource poor. While incapable of full independence from great powers, those powers couldn't effectively control it either. Thus, Khotan's kings always had sharp political instincts, dancing between major powers while maintaining independence beneath surface compliance. This was the survival strategy for oasis states in the western regions. When the Tang dynasty was founded, Khotan, like other western region states, was subordinate to the Western Turks. In Emperor Taizong's late Zhengguan era, after Gaochang and Kucha fell, Tang power peaked. The Khotan king, sensing the shift, immediately surrendered and personally visited Chang'an to pay homage. Later, when Tibetans rose, crossed the Kunlun Mountains into the Tarim Basin, the Khotan king fled with his family to Luoyang. Newly arrived in Luoyang, the king initially used Fu She, a phonetic translation, as his surname, lacking Han cultural knowledge. But he soon realized Yuchi, a prestigious Tang surname, sounded similar phonetically, so he adopted it. In 692 AD, Empress Lu Zetian reconquered the western regions. To consolidate gains, she stationed 30,000 troops there, pouring vast military funds into the region. Khotan's prince seized this chance to return home and restore his rule, lasting until the An Lushan Rebellion. Except for one minor incident, Khotan remained subordinate to Tan. As the Pisha commandery under the Anshi Protectorate, the thousands of soldiers garrisoned. Tang soldiers served in Khotan Garrison, one of Anji's 4 garrisons, where wooden slips from this era were unearthed. These wooden slips are grain tax receipts. Each slip records in Khotanese and Chinese the taxpayer's name, grain quantity, and type. This shows Tang government strictly controlled local tax procedures. In 756 AD, news of An Lushan's rebellion reached Khotan. King Yuchi Shang, under 25, immediately led 5,000 Tang troops inland. He left his brother Yuchi Yao to rule Khotan. While historians praise Yuchi Shang's loyalty, another reality existed. After Tang's collapse, military funding stopped. Tiny Khotan couldn't sustain 5,000 soldiers. After this, Tibetan conquest severed Khotan's ties with Tang. By late Tang, independent Khotan again sought connections with Central Plains dynasties. From the 10th century, Dunhuang documents mention Khotan, its kings now bearing Tang's imperial surname, Li. The most famous king, Li Shengtian, married Cao Yi Jin's daughter, Dunhuang's ruler, co-founded grottos depicting them both. Khotanese documents record 7 princes attempting to reach China's capital with 600 jin of jade and goods, forced to sell tribute due to warfare on the Ganzhou route, ending in poverty. Undeterred by failure, they tried again. Li Shentian's son, Li Kongde, eventually reached Kaifeng, paid homage to the Song Emperor, then returned to rule Khotan as King Yuchi Shulo. In Khotanese texts, he's called Yuchi Shuluo. So how did this Buddhist kingdom with deep Central Plains ties transform? Islamic regimes entering the Tarim Basin reshaped its cultural landscape. Originally, during Li Konde's reign, Turkic peoples, early Tang Sayak masters, revived and converted to Islam. They established the Karakhanid Khanate in Central Asia, clashing with Khotan. In 970 AD, Li Konde defeated Karakhanid forces near Kashgar, reporting to his Dunhuang uncle and gifting an elephant to Song court to proclaim victory. But this victory wasn't decisive. Both sides engaged in 3 decades of warfare afterward. During this time, Muslims viewed the conquest of Khotan as a holy war. In 1606 AD, the Karakhanid Khanate launched a massive eastern campaign, conquering Khotan at great cost. Later, Mahmud al-Kashgari, a renowned Karakhanid scholar, depicted Khotan's fall in a brief poem. Our coming was like a flood. We entered their cities, demolished their revered Buddha statues and temples, defiled their sacred sites. This upheaval seemingly prompted Dunhuang to hastily seal the library cave. After this, Khotan gradually Islamized and Turkified, ending a millennium of Buddhist culture and severing ties with Central Plains dynasties. Finally, Khotan's language and culture faded into oblivion. Today, the Karakhanid conquest marks the start of local historical memory. For centuries after Khotan's fall, such transformations spread across the western regions, even reaching the Hexi Corridor. The Silk Road's former glory vanished like smoke in history. With this, we've covered all 7 key Silk Road sites, differing somewhat from Part 1. Part 2 focused more on Chang'an, Dunhuang, and Khotan. During the Silk Road's decline, this decline stemmed primarily from economic recession caused by political turmoil. Short-haul trade dominated the Silk Road, while long-distance merchants dwindled, leaving only diplomatic envoys and pilgrim monks. Ultimately, Islamic powers transformed the Tarim Basin's cultural landscape, erasing the region's multicultural memory and burying the Silk Road's past in dust, waiting a millennium for rediscovery of its wonders. By now, you've gained vivid, deeper insight into the ancient Silk Road's human ecosystem. Notably, the new history of the Silk Road features exceptional illustrations, rare images, and high-definition color plates. Additionally, each chapter includes maps with ancient modern place name tables at the end. Extremely convenient. If ancient Silk Road history interests you, this book makes an excellent reference. All right, that concludes our introduction to the new history of the Silk Road. Listening notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.